Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Spinner. I am excited to have a returning guest on the show. I really enjoyed his last book. And for those who aren't familiar with Scott Archer Jones, if you want to listen to the previous episode, we did chat about And Throw Away the Skins last time. And now we're going to be talking about his newest book called The Moth. Scott, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. As you said, my name is Scott Archer Jones, and it's not snobbery or elite collegiate background that lets me use my middle name. It's because there are so many Scott Joneses on the internet that I'd be totally lost without something. And besides, it made my mother very happy because it's her maiden name. I've started writing about 15 years ago when I retired from a job that made money. Most of you know, very few writers actually make much money from what they're doing. They do it out of love. But I'm in a position to where I can dedicate a fair amount of my life to putting books together. And so far I've got 5 that are published. They're all through indie publishers because I'm not with the big 5 and I'm not agented. But those indie publishers actually turn out to be nicer, I think, than the internal corporate publishing world these days. So they're very, very supportive and they do everything that they can from a very limited set of resources. I'm working on another 3 books right now, and I'm very pleased with the reception of The Moth so far out there in the book world. Of course, I get a little bit of local support up here in Angel Fire, where I live in New Mexico, with the library, but I've kind of got leverage there because I'm on their board, so I think that some of it is taking care of a board member and some of it is charity. And that's pretty much me.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the reception because it's been really good so far. Tell us a little bit about your experience with the New Mexico Book Awards last summer.
I entered in a couple of categories. The category I wanted to win was literary, but I've read the book that won it. It was definitely a good choice, but I won the crime novel because The Moth, the book we're going to be talking about, is a mixed genre book, but it does have a substantial foot in the crime world, although it doesn't read like a mystery and it doesn't read like a procedural heist type of book. I'm very pleased to get that. I've picked up a couple of finalists here and there. For instance, out of Colorado, there's an organization named CIPA, and their prize is called the Evie. Unfortunately, it's not the Oscar, it's the Evie. And I was a finalist with them also. One of my previous books actually won women's fiction from CIPA against about 250 other books. They're a group of people that can judge hard and choose right, I think. I was quite a strange thing for your basic vanilla white guy to take home a prize in women's fiction.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about The Moth and its story, because it's, as you said, it has some literary leanings. It's got crime in it, but it's not like necessarily a mystery, heist type of thing. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what is The Moth.
Like all books have secret structure under them that very often the writer is the sole person that knows what they're doing. I designed The Moth really as a picaresque book, which is the original great novel was a picaresque book. It was Don Quixote. And there, what Cervantes wanted to do was he wanted to show society through little vignettes that were discovered by his somewhat hapless character, Don Quixote. And so Don Quixote is blundering across Spain, living out his own delusion, but he's also taking summary pictures, I think is the way to think of it, of what the society is that he's stumbling through. So I did the same thing. I wrote it nearly in the form of a biography about a man out of Chicago, grows up as a boy, and he goes through life experiences that are shaping him and not necessarily shaping him for good. He ends up in East LA in the time frame when East LA was a very, very hard neighborhood. And he's a pawnbroker. That's what he does. But he discovers that being a pawnbroker to a community that is essentially broke all the time, it's very hard for him to make payments. It's very hard for him to keep the doors open. And so he turns to selling essentially hardware for crime. He's the Costco of crime. So people are coming to him, and if they need false license plates, he can supply those. If they need bulletproof vests, he knows where he can buy those off of the back of a truck. And he gets pretty good at it. His only problem is, much like Don Quixote, he's a little hapless. I've been collecting examples of people who are very smart, who are talented, but they're basically incompetent. So I kind of set the moth up to be that type of person. About half the time his schemes fall apart. A quarter of the time he runs into serious personal risk where he might be one of the blowback people associated with a chunk of crime. So it gives me the opportunity to enmesh him in various schemes, and it gives me the opportunity to have those schemes go wrong, sometimes in an ironic or a sarcastic or a ludicrous fashion. So that's the underlying framework, I think, of the moth. Other people have said, no, you're doing an 8-part TV series, so I guess you could read it that way. Tell me, how did you find it?
I really enjoyed the structure. I liked the bits and pieces. Well, and it's kind of funny. I'll ask you about this in just a second, kind of the what literary fiction versus upmarket versus what all of that is. But I really enjoyed that you got these little bits and pieces of his life where you saw how he develops and becomes who he is, because you cover a pretty big chunk of his life. But it doesn't feel like this long biography where you're like, where is this going? Because I've read books like that where it's, the story of a character's life, and you're just kind of like, okay, like, yeah, stuff's happening, but it doesn't always seem connected. Part of what I enjoyed about the structure, I've had a lot more opportunity since I started doing this show to read more literary fiction and kind of been introduced to like the upmarket fiction. And what I enjoyed about this is that I had a sense of a story across the connected vignettes. And
Mm-hmm.
even though it's not, like you said, like, there wasn't one mystery to solve, there wasn't necessarily like one overarching story, but the story was the main character in his life and seeing him develop and how things went. So I really just found that fascinating, and I enjoyed seeing his life develop and seeing what it did to him as a person over the course of the story. And so, like, for me, it has that literary element of not necessarily, it's not like the 3 act structure that we see more commonly in like genre fiction.
Right.
But it was the story of his life, and it wasn't just like a chain of events that happened, and they happened. There we go. That was what it was. Like, I
Yeah.
enjoyed seeing his progression as a character. And this book and this type of structure, I think, is really interesting for writers to take a look at and see how characters respond to what happens in a story. Because
Right. Right.
sometimes that's something I see with certain books where it's like, something happens and the next thing happens and the next thing happens, but they don't really seem to impact the character. Like, it's just like they did this and they moved on and did this and moved on. And I think really showing how things that happen in a story connect with the character and either cause harm or bring hope, like, that really lets readers connect in a meaningful
Yeah.
way. And I loved that about this book.
Yeah. I think that John Gardner, who was a great creative writing teacher, he put it right. He said there's a difference between a chronology, a story, or a plot. And chronology is things just following on sequentially to each other. But a plot is where you are actually affecting the character, or you're affecting the universe that the character has to live in. And I was trying to do that with The Moth. There's several big questions that a lot of writers, a lot of very talented writers are trying to answer. Hemingway said it best, and he said there is no other plot except our own mortality. But I think that he was a little constrained there. I've got a fascination with how do we take our innocence, meaning our children who are nearly some form of wild animal, how do good kids turn out bad? And that's the moth's problem. His dilemma, of course, is that he's not all bad. He actually has big chunks of humanity he's carrying around with him that get him in trouble. He has a predilection, for instance, for picking the wrong women that sooner or later endanger him. He's living in a very, very tough place, and mistakes are not well received. It's nearly an anti-survival mechanism. So I liked the idea of taking the moth, who is a young boy, has a perfectly charming mother, very old European, and very tough, unethical Irish father in a Chicago neighborhood, and basically sending him into a spiral to where he ends up selling automatic weapons in Los Angeles. It's how can people be corrupted and corrupted so slowly that they don't know that they're falling off the cliff?
Yeah, I think because for him, so much of what gets him started into this line of work and the choices that he makes is just survival. He
Yeah,
ends up not having many resources, and it's just like, okay, do this little odd job thing, sell this stuff here, bits and pieces of just trying to get day to day. And like you
yes,
said, it's kind of that, frog in the warm water versus the boiling water, where you don't notice. You're
right.
just like, well, I got to do this, I've got to pay that, I've got to eat. And you eventually get to this point where it's just like, how the heck did I get to where I am now? Like, what happened here?
Yeah. Well, he starts in middle school, as you'll remember, where he learns a fundamental lesson. When you're the weak kid in the class, the short kid in the class, the way you get out of trouble is you just lie like crazy. You tell the person what you want to hear, or you implicate someone else. And that was kind of his first step, a loss of integrity. But it was a loss of integrity in a turf war in a tough school. And later on, he's trying to make money, largely for his single-parent mother raising him. He's selling bootleg tapes out on Wilshire Boulevard and discovers he's in the middle of a turf war for which piece of the sidewalk he can get into. And so everything he attempts is a chance to step further down the ladder.
And it just, like I said, that was what I really enjoyed about the structure of this, is that each chapter is its own little story, but
Yeah,
they are connected over the course of his life. And you, as the reader, kind of get to see these little puzzle pieces being put together through each
right.
chapter. And it's weird to say I had a lot of fun reading it because it is like some dark stuff. And he has some pretty rough experiences. I guess maybe it's better to say I enjoyed the experience of reading the book and seeing it all come together.
Well, I'm glad that none of the moth's world impinges on you personally. I hope it was a foreign travel trip for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's something like just me as a person. Similar to you, like I'm just really fascinated by the psychology that drives people and
Uh-huh.
how they end up where they end up. I listen to a lot of like murder podcasts, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's not like, I don't really want to hear like any of the gory details or, the icky things, but hearing the story of how something like that happened and how a regular human being ended up on a course that led them to end someone's life and do terrible things, where you're just like, how does this happen to people? Because it's not always, some kid who grew up being abused and beaten and drugs and all that. Like sometimes it is a perfectly normal person who had a normal upbringing, decent family, and it
Yes.
all just spirals out of control somehow. I don't know. It's really fascinating to me to try to understand how people end up going down these different routes.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that the book allowed me to do was to route the moth through various places. The places are big shapers here. As a matter of fact, my version of East LA is pretty much a major character in the book, one of the big antagonists. But I love the idea of starting in a Catholic-bound upper blue-collar neighborhood in Chicago and plunking him into a squalid little development on the far east side of LA where his mother could afford housing, and then taking him into the guts of East LA. So place informs character, I believe, very much in a real way. I've only read one book called Rocket City, I think, where where the place was so bland that it wasn't a character. In a way, it was one over a character. The shock of the book was, how can you just be so ordinary, so without detail, and still have people that are moving in that environment and creating a work of fiction? I think that it's much, much easier to write out of a strong sense of place. And so you spend as much time, I think, trying to figure out that place. I got a big map of LA, is what I did. And then I used Google Street to walk around it a lot. In other books that I've written, I've actually gone out and done the research on place to the point where my wife is driving and she's saying, "Don't take their picture. Don't take their picture. This is a rough neighborhood. Don't take their picture." And that was in Albuquerque. So,
Oh. Yeah, there's certain parts of Albuquerque you gotta be careful.
yeah. Well, it's surprising. The neighborhood I wrote that book for is so gentrified now. There are parts of it I could never afford to live in, to tell you the truth. But the time I set it and the time I visited it, the only nice houses were the houses that were built by the drug lords for their mothers. And
Oh, wow.
they looked a little like the U.S. consulate, armored, with
Yeah.
walls around them with glass in the top, that type of thing.
Wow. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
wondering how much personal experience you had with that area of LA because it felt very realistic. And like I had no problem kind of picturing what you were talking about and understanding the community of people and the conflict and the
Yeah.
needs there. I was wondering what your experience was with that.
Well, there's research and then there's on the ground. A lot of writers write directly out of the neighborhoods that they grew up in. And I can tell you, I could name people out of my writer's circle, for instance, or my master's class that are like that. But at the end of the day, we want to make our books as universal as possible and we don't want to be bored. So basically, I did tons of reading on East LA and on California in general. And I spent a fair amount of time. I interviewed 4 friends who were Californites, which sounds kind of like the obscene name for the rock song, doesn't it? But so basically, I had to put myself in the frame and then be very, very careful that I was confirming the details that I was putting into it. You can get hung up so easily. I'm writing historical fiction now out of the 1700s, and I spend more time trying to get the facts right than I do get the dialogue right. It's the price you pay when you want to shift place. Whereas on the other hand, Edith Wharton, she wrote in the milieu that she knew. And it's a good example of somebody who believed strongly in place and was very, very proud of being kind of a class and a regional writer, and said very succinctly that, all fiction should be regional. I guess maybe Charles Dickens didn't agree when he started a book. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But he had a pretty good access for research into France, so I think he did rather well shifting his world. So I placed the Moss neighborhood in a very specific place and found out as much about it as I possibly could, including what stores are there, how long they've been there. But I didn't name it specifically in the book because I didn't want somebody walking around that block with my book in the hand and saying, oh, he got this right, he got that wrong. But for me, it was Whittier and South Atlantic. Very, very Anglo names right in the middle of a neighborhood that had become predominantly Hispano. One of the things that I really liked about East LA is that you can put a very, very mixed population of people into that neighborhood. It's not like picking out some white neighborhood in Massachusetts that's an 80-minute commute into Boston. And I really got to play with names for that reason. I just loved inventing Eloy the Rent. I loved the character Little Peep because he wasn't little and he had a lot to say. And the McDonald brothers, if you'll remember, they were of Nigerian descent, so they had that beautiful, beautiful blue-black skin coloration. And I had mobsters out of New York City who came out of the Russian mafia. And I got to name them. That was so much fun. And to try to get the cadences in their speech their speech differentials between each other down and to get it to where it was believable. And the acid test is when your beta readers say, well, you didn't use speech tags on this page, but I knew exactly who was talking by how they were handling the dialogue. That can be very gratifying to a writer to get that right. Of course, there are places where my beta reader said, I can't tell who this is, You're confusing me as to who this antagonist is that you're bringing into the story, which always makes the work better. I kept a very careful list of all of the names in 2 columns, and I had one column that was labeled thoroughly bad, and then the next column was not so bad or maybe even good. And so I ranked the toxic characters against the characters that were merely in the neighborhood trying to survive. It gives the book a little balance, I think. Every book is a little different, I think, and I probably can't use that technique again, but it was very helpful for me at the time.
Well, I think probably depends on like the goals of the story and whether
Yeah,
like you need that particular range or not. Yeah,
yeah,
I really enjoyed the diversity in the book, and they were very identifiable. And it's kind of funny because I started a creative writing club at the school I work with, and it was kind of late in the year, so it was a small group. And it was funny how many of them mentioned dialogue, like they needed to work on their dialogue and wanted to know like how to improve that so everybody didn't sound the same. And we did a couple of exercises practicing with dialogue, and I think that's such an important exercise for writers to do. To just, pick any random characters, random topic, it doesn't matter, but do a scene that's largely dialogue and then see if a reader can tell who is talking without the dialogue tags. Because it's so
yeah,
easy to just, everybody has the author's voice and they all sound the same. And that's a great starting point for first draft. But
yeah.
as you mentioned, like looking into how do people of this region or culture or whatever actually sound and speak down to the cadence and the word choice, that can really bring characters alive. And I thought you did a great job with that in this book.
Well, thank you. I think you're entirely right. You'll find places in America where they flip their clauses out to the end of the sentence and it just delivers an entirely different rhythm to the speech. And I think that also forms of humor and sarcasm can really inform a work. I have not written anything in the deep, deep South yet, except a book where a person from California has been dumped in Louisiana. And that's my first attempt to try to get a deep South way of looking at things. The way that you come in uniquely, I think, by saying the opposite of what you mean. And we all know the phrases like, bless your heart, which means get the heck away from me. Or they say, wow, how interesting, which means it's not interesting at all and it may be offensive. The oblique way that they cloak in a lot of instances, whether it's black culture or white culture, what they're really saying to you. I think it has something to do with 200-year legacies down in the South and what you learn in the home. That was my first attempt to write a cloaked set of dialogue to develop unique voices. And I put a kid from Los Angeles into that mix so that, you would actually see it ping pong on the page. I think I did okay. It's coming out this summer, so my indie publisher liked it enough to take me on again.
Well,
So,
that's awesome. Well, and
yeah.
we're kind of getting close to the point to start wrapping up, and I did want to ask about what are you working on next? So if you want to elaborate a little bit more on your current projects, that would be great.
Okay, well, let's talk about the book that's coming out first. It's going to come out on Fomite Press, and you can order from them. You can order on bookshop.org. I actually ask people not to order off of Amazon on purpose because of the strange way that Amazon treats its customers and treats its clients like writers. And it's called A Narrow Slice of Daylight, and I'm hoping to have it out by the end of the summer and launch the book. And it was a book that was about 3 years in the writing. My current projects that I'm actually actively editing and working on, I've got a book that's a family dynasty that starts in Prohibition. I've been fascinated with how money gets laundered through time. The Rockefellers are a great example, for instance, where you can see that it's ill-gotten gains that by the second generation, nobody cares. They just care that it's big money. And so it's about the rise and fall of a family over 3 generations. And then I'm working on a historical fiction that I mentioned before. It's a book about a very, very turbulent time during Scottish history, which is in the early 1700s, where you have huge religious conflict, where people are quite willing to kill each other in the name of God. There's 3 principal wings of thought in all the politics there and all of the fighting. And that's Presbyterian, Episcopalian, and Catholic. They all painted themselves as being righteous, but they were quite willing to burn out villages. And so it's a conflict also between classes, which you cannot avoid when you're talking about a near feudal society. So those are basically the 3 things that I have that are active and ongoing. Much like you, I still write short stories occasionally, and it's normally when I feel I'm losing a little focus or enthusiasm on the long works, and so I'll go off and do something for a couple of weeks in a short story, see if I can move an idea that's entirely different to the point where I feel like I have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 words that are good enough to go out there and publish. So that's kind of what my new projects are all about right now. I'm like most writers, I keep a list of things I'd like to do someday, but I haven't picked out what I would start as a brand new first draft.
Well, I'm sure ideas will pop up, and too many at one time seems like what usually happens.
Yes, yes.
Those all sound really interesting. So yeah, please keep in touch. I'm always happy to have you back, and that would be great to hear more about these as they get released.
Okay, that's great. I want to really thank you for all your good work. It's not many radio stations, it's not many radio spots that will focus on regional authors, so I feel honored to be included.
Well, I appreciate that. It's nice to be able to help people who, don't always get the attention they deserve and get their names out there a bit more. Well, and to help with that, where can people find you and the book online? You mentioned a few places already, but definitely shout out your website.
Yes, it's www, and then it's scottarcherjones.com. So I tried to keep it as simple as possible. If you go to that website, you'll see all of the books. You can see which book festivals I'm wasting money on going to. You never make back even the money that you're spending on the motel is what I found. You can also see my blog, and my blog is shaped largely towards teaching craft, both for readers and for writers. For instance, I ran an entire series of a suite of posts that were associated with how do you speak in each point of view. And I dissected the points of view that everybody knows about and threw in a couple of extra ones that are more contemporary that you don't see in a regular commercial fiction. If you are at all interested in being able to read the top flight books at the level that those books are written, I might be able to offer you some clues.
It's great, especially for, rural areas. We don't always have a lot of access to writing workshops and things like that. I love that the writing community is so great about sharing their knowledge and resources and just trying to help each other.
Yeah, and I appreciate you starting a new group up because I've watched other people run groups, and I think I've got a fairly good understanding of how much work that can be.
That seems to be working well and hopefully be helpful to the people who come. So it's been nice.
Yeah, so be sure and do an episode with your first writer that wins a Pulitzer.
I'm rooting for them all. Thank you so much, Scott, for coming on today. And I'll remind our listeners the book is called The Moth, and I will have your website in the show notes. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much.